My wife destroyed our son's passion for cooking out of jealousy, and I watched my marriage fall apart because of it. I made her move out, but she started partying with her single friend, overdosed, cheated on me. Then I served her divorce papers at the hospital. I, 38M, thought my wife Helen, 36F, and I had a solid marriage. Helen is half Portuguese, and she grew up in a household where cooking was serious business. Her grandmother taught her everything, and by the time we met, she was already this incredible cook who could make anything taste amazing. When we first started dating, I was completely blown away by her cooking. I grew up eating frozen dinners and takeout because my parents never really learned to cook properly. I tried a few times when I was younger, but everything I made turned out either burnt or tasteless. So when Helen made me her grandmother's recipe for bacalhau on our third date, I knew I wanted to marry her. I'm not exaggerating when I say her cooking was one of the main reasons I fell for her. Throughout our marriage, the kitchen was always her space. I never complained about it because I genuinely couldn't cook anything worth eating. Every night, she'd make dinner for all of us, and I made sure to thank her every single time. I'd tell her how good everything was, help with the dishes, and basically stayed out of her way when she was cooking. It worked for us. She seemed happy with the arrangement, and I was more than happy to have home-cooked meals every day. We have 2 kids together, our son Murphy, 13M, and our daughter Leanna, 10F. About 18 months ago, Murphy started watching these cooking videos online. At first, it was just something he did on his phone when he was bored. Then he started asking Helen questions about different techniques and ingredients. She seemed really pleased that he was interested in something she loved. They started going to the grocery store together every Saturday morning, and twice a week, they'd cook dinner together. Helen would guide him through recipes, show him how to properly cut vegetables, teach him about seasoning. I thought it was great that they had this thing they could share. Murphy got really into it. He started keeping a notebook where he'd write down recipes and notes about what worked and what didn't. He'd watch videos before school, during lunch, whenever he had free time. Within about 6 months, he'd gotten surprisingly good. The meals he made with Helen were just as good as the ones she made alone. I was impressed, but I didn't think much of it beyond being proud of my son for sticking with something. Then about 2 months ago, Murphy came to me one evening and asked if he could cook an entire dinner by himself. He wanted to try making this pasta dish he'd been watching videos about, something with a cream sauce and pancetta. I told him that sounded great and that I couldn't wait to try it. Helen was sitting on the couch nearby, and when I looked over at her, she had this weird expression on her face. She didn't say no exactly, but she kept making these comments about how the recipe might be too complicated, how he should wait until he had more experience, how she should at least supervise. Murphy looked disappointed, so I told Helen that he'd been cooking for over a year now and that it would be good for him to try something on his own. She eventually agreed, but she didn't look happy about it. That Saturday, Helen took Murphy to the store to get ingredients. When they got back, Murphy went straight to the kitchen and told Helen he wanted to do everything himself. She came into the living room where Leanna and I were watching television, and she just sat down without saying anything. She kept glancing toward the kitchen. I asked her if she was okay, and she said she was fine, but she clearly wasn't. Her jaw was tight and she was bouncing her leg up and down, something she only does when she's stressed. I tried to make conversation, telling her that Murphy would probably still want to cook with her after this, that this was just him wanting to prove to himself that he could do it alone. She nodded but didn't really respond. When Murphy called us for dinner about an hour later, I was genuinely surprised by how good everything looked. The pasta was perfectly cooked, the sauce had this rich color to it, and he'd even made a simple salad to go with it. I sat down and took a bite, and it was really good. Not just good for a 13-year-old kid, but actually good. The flavors were balanced, nothing was overcooked or undercooked, and he'd clearly put thought into the presentation. I started praising him immediately. I told him the sauce was incredible, that the pasta was cooked perfectly, that I was impressed he'd managed to get everything ready at the same time. I also gave him a few small suggestions about things he could try next time, like adding a bit more garlic or letting the pancetta get crispier. I was trying to be encouraging while also giving him some direction, the way I thought a parent should. Leanna took one bite and immediately made a face. She pushed her plate away and said the food was gross. Before I could say anything, Helen made this noise in her throat and pushed her own plate forward. She agreed with Leanna, saying the pasta was overcooked and the sauce was way too salty. She said it in this flat voice that made it clear she wasn't just giving constructive criticism. I looked over at Murphy, and his entire face had changed. He was staring down at his plate, not eating. I kept eating and telling him how good it was, trying to counteract what Helen had said. But the damage was done. He barely ate anything, and when Helen got up to clear the dishes, she took Leanna's plate and her own plate without asking if anyone else was finished. I didn't say anything in front of the kids. Helen and I have always had a rule about not fighting in front of Murphy and Leanna. But after dinner, I found Murphy in his room, and he was laying on his bed facing the wall. I sat down next to him and put my hand on his shoulder. I told him that his mother probably just had a long day, that she wasn't feeling well, that she didn't mean what she said. I told him the dinner was genuinely good and that he should be proud of himself. He didn't say anything, just nodded. I left him alone after a few minutes. Later that night, After both kids were in bed, I went to find Helen. She was in our bedroom, getting ready for bed like nothing had happened. I closed the door and asked her what that was about at dinner. She tried to brush it off, saying she was just being honest about the food. I pressed her on it, telling her that she'd been unnecessarily harsh and that Murphy was clearly upset. That's when she got angry. She turned around and asked me when I'd ever praised her cooking the way I'd praised Murphy's that night. She said I'd spent the entire meal going on and on about how amazing everything was, giving him detailed compliments about specific things he'd done right. She said I never did that for her meals, that I just said, "Thank you," and that was it. I didn't know what to say for a second because I hadn't expected that. Then I made a mistake. I sort of laughed, not because I thought it was funny, but because I was caught off guard. It was barely a sound, just air coming out of my nose, but she heard it. She started yelling at me, asking me what was so funny about her feelings. I tried to explain that I'd only been so enthusiastic because I was trying to encourage Murphy, that he was just starting out and needed that kind of support. I told her I didn't praise her as much because she was already an incredible cook and didn't need constant validation. She calmed down a bit after that. She admitted she'd been too harsh on Murphy and said she would apologize to him the next day. I thought that was the end of it. The following Monday morning, I was getting ready to drive Murphy to school. I went outside to start the car while he grabbed his backpack. When he got in the car, he was holding his hood up over his face and wouldn't look at me. I asked him what was wrong, and at first he wouldn't answer. I pulled over a block from our house and asked him again. He told me that after I'd gone outside, Helen had pulled him aside and told him she'd be doing all the cooking from now on. She said she'd thought about it and decided it was better if he focused on other things. Murphy's voice was shaking when he told me this. I told him I'd talk to his mother and that everything would be okay. I stopped at a gas station and bought him a chocolate bar before dropping him off. I left work early that day. I got home around 2 in the afternoon, before the kids got back from school. Helen was in the kitchen, and as soon as I walked in, I asked her why she'd told Murphy he couldn't cook anymore. She said it was her kitchen and her decision. I asked her how she could do that to him after she'd promised to apologize. We started yelling at each other. I called her vindictive for punishing our son because she was angry at me. She said Murphy was being a baby about the whole thing and that cooking wasn't something boys should be wasting their time on anyway. That comment caught me completely off guard. She'd never said anything like that before. The argument ended with both of us too angry to keep talking. I went to the guest room and stayed there for the rest of the night. The next day, Helen took Leanna out shopping after school. They came back with bags and bags of new clothes, shoes, and toys. It was way more than Leanna needed, and I knew immediately what Helen was doing. She was using our money to spoil Leanna while completely ignoring Murphy. I confronted her about it that evening, and we fought again. I moved my things into the guest room permanently that night. For the next month, Helen kept up this pattern. She'd take Leanna out for special treats, buy her whatever she wanted, and barely speak to Murphy unless she had to. Meanwhile, Murphy stopped watching cooking videos. He stopped asking questions about food. He just came home from school, did his homework, and stayed in his room. I tried to balance things out by taking Murphy to do things he enjoyed, and sometimes I brought Leanna along so it wouldn't seem like I was playing favorites. But when Leanna came with us, she'd spend the entire time talking about all the things Helen had bought her or all the special attention she was getting. I could see it bothered Murphy, but he never said anything. I talked to my parents and my younger brother about what was happening. They all agreed Helen was wrong, but they kept saying it would blow over eventually, that married couples go through rough patches. None of them seemed to understand how serious it had gotten. After a month of this, I couldn't stand looking at Helen anymore. Watching her treat our son like he didn't exist while spoiling our daughter made me see her completely differently. We'd had arguments before over the years, but she'd never taken anything out on the kids. This was different. I started questioning whether I wanted to stay married to someone who could be this cruel to their own child. I knew I couldn't just jump straight to divorce, though. I needed to do something to fix this situation, or at least try. That's why I'm posting here. I need advice on how to bring up the idea of counseling with Helen without starting another massive fight. I don't know if she'll even agree to go. Part of me is worried that if I push her on this, she'll just get worse with Murphy. But I can't let things continue the way they are now. So that's where I am. I'm sleeping in the guest room, my wife is emotionally abusing our son, and I don't know what to do next. Update 1: I took Murphy to my parents' house the Saturday after I made my first post. I told them everything that had been happening, and I had Murphy tell them too. Seeing their grandson explain how his mother had banned him from cooking and had been ignoring him changed their attitude completely. My mother started crying, and my father said they'd support whatever I decided to do. I decided Helen needed to move out until she dealt with whatever was going on with her. But I'm in Canada, and I learned from a lawyer that I needed to get divorce papers ready immediately. Here, you either need to be separated for a year or have proof of adultery or abuse to get a quick divorce. The lawyer said even if we worked things out, having the papers ready was smart. That Saturday night, Murphy and Leanna stayed with my parents. I went back home Sunday morning with my mother. She talked to Helen first because they'd always gotten along well. Then I told Helen she needed to leave the house until she figured out why she was treating Murphy this way. I expected her to fight me on it, but she agreed. My mother being there probably helped. I gave her two options: she could stay at my parents' place, or I'd pay for a hotel room nearby. Her parents lived 6 hours away, so that wasn't practical. I also told her she needed to attend counseling every week, and I'd pay for that too. The next day, Helen and I sat down with Murphy and Leanna and explained that their mother was going to be staying somewhere else for a while. Murphy seemed to understand. Leanna got very upset and started crying. Helen calmed her down eventually, promising they'd still see each other regularly. Helen moved into my parents' guest room that afternoon. For the first month, things actually seemed to get better. Helen went to every single counseling appointment. I met her for dinner with the kids a few times a week, and she was treating Murphy normally again. She apologized to him for what she'd said and did, and she actually seemed to mean it. She was acting like the woman I'd married, and I started thinking maybe we could fix this after all. Then everything fell apart in the 5th week. It was a Friday evening, and I was making dinner for the kids when my phone started buzzing constantly. Helen had sent me a long series of text messages calling me every name you could think of. She said I was trying to steal her children, that I was probably cheating on her, that I was an asshole who wanted to control her life. The messages went on and on. Then she turned her phone off. I called my mother immediately. She told me Helen had left the house earlier that afternoon with all her belongings and hadn't said where she was going. Over the next week, I pieced together what happened. Helen had told her best friend Madeline about the separation. I'd never liked Madeline much. She was single, went out clubbing constantly, and had a habit of getting Helen to go out drinking with her before we had kids. Madeline convinced Helen that I was trying to kick her out permanently and take the kids away from her. Helen moved in with Madeline and basically went off the rails. She stopped answering my calls. My mother tried reaching her too, but Helen wouldn't respond to her either. Then Madeline sent me a text message calling me a loser and saying Helen was too good for me. She also said Helen was sleeping with some younger guy she'd met at a club. I took screenshots of everything. Helen spent that entire week partying with Madeline. From what I gathered later, it was drugs and alcohol every night, the kind of lifestyle Helen had left behind when we got serious. The following Thursday at 3 a.m, I got a call from a hospital. Helen had overdosed on something and had been dropped off at the emergency room by someone who didn't leave their name. I called my mother to come watch the kids, then I drove to the hospital. When I got there, they told me she was stable but was sleeping. I sat in the waiting room for hours. When they finally let me see her, she was awake but looked terrible. She started apologizing right away, crying and saying she'd messed everything up. She confirmed some of what I'd already figured out about the past week. I asked her directly if she'd slept with someone else. She stopped talking and just looked at the floor. That was all the answer I needed. I told her it wasn't the right time or place to talk about everything, that she needed to focus on recovering. Then I left. The next morning, I went back to the hospital. Helen was being discharged, and I drove her to my parents' house. I helped her inside and got her settled in bed. Right before I left the room, I took the divorce papers out of my bag and put them on the bedside table. I told her I expected her to sign them within a week. I also told her I had proof she'd cheated on me during the separation. My parents knew I was planning to do this. I'd warned them the night before. Over the next 2 weeks, Helen called me constantly. Some days she'd be crying and begging for another chance, saying she'd made a terrible mistake. Other days she'd be screaming at me, calling me names and threatening to make the divorce as difficult as possible. It switched back and forth every other day or so. Her family and friends started texting me too. Her sister called me a heartless bastard. Her mother said I was abandoning Helen when she needed me most. Madeline sent more messages saying I'd ruined Helen's life. I took screenshots of all of it. My parents supported the divorce but questioned my timing. They thought serving the papers right after she got out of the hospital was harsh. I understood their point, but I was certain this was what I needed to do. I didn't want her in my life anymore, and I didn't want my kids around her considering everything she'd done. I'm planning to go for full custody. I haven't told Murphy and Leanna about the divorce yet. They think their mother is still away working on getting better. I'm planning to tell them in the next week or two, once school ends for the summer. Update 2: Helen signed the divorce papers. It took her 3 weeks instead of 1, but she eventually signed them. Her lawyer tried to fight the adultery claim, but I had the screenshots from Madeline, and Helen eventually admitted it had happened. That meant we could move forward without waiting a year. The custody battle was harder than I expected. Helen's lawyer argued that she'd been going through a mental health crisis and that she deserved another chance to be a proper parent. My lawyer brought up the emotional abuse toward Murphy, the overdose, the drug use, and the cheating. We ended up with a compromise. I got primary custody, and Helen gets supervised visits every other weekend. I told Murphy and Leanna about the divorce on the first day of summer break. Leanna cried for hours. Murphy asked me if it was because of what happened with the cooking, and I told him no, that his mother and I had problems that had nothing to do with him. I don't think he believed me, but I kept repeating it. Helen's parents drove up the following week and stayed for a few days. They took Leanna out a lot, and they tried to spend time with Murphy too, but he kept making excuses to avoid them. Her father pulled me aside before they left and said I destroyed their daughter's life. I didn't respond to that. The first supervised visit happened at a community center 3 weeks ago. My mother came with me and stayed with Helen, Murphy, and Leanna for 2 hours while I waited in the parking lot. My mother said it went okay. Leanna was happy to see Helen. Murphy was polite but distant. Helen cried multiple times. Murphy started cooking again last month. I came home from work one day and found him in the kitchen making chicken stir-fry. I asked him if he wanted help, and he said no. When dinner was ready, all three of us sat down to eat. Leanna made a face at first, probably out of habit, but then she actually tried the food and said it was good. Murphy didn't say anything, just kept eating. He's been cooking twice a week since then. He doesn't watch videos on his phone anymore, though. Instead, he borrows my laptop and watches them in his room with the door closed. I don't comment on it because I don't want to make a big deal out of it and somehow ruin it for him again. Helen's second visit was last weekend. This time she asked if she could bring them to my parents' house instead of meeting at the community center. I agreed since my mother would still be there supervising. Leanna came back talking about how Helen had promised to take her shopping soon. Murphy came back quiet and went straight to his room. I asked him later if everything was okay. He said Helen kept asking him questions about whether I was seeing anyone, whether I talked about her, things like that. I told him he didn't have to answer questions like that if he didn't want to, and that if she kept doing it, to let me know. The divorce should be finalized within the next month. After that, Helen wants to adjust the custody arrangement. She's been sober for almost 2 months now according to my mother, and she's still seeing a counselor. Her lawyer already sent a letter saying she wants to move toward unsupervised visits. I'm not ready to consider that yet. Leanna asks when she can stay overnight at her mother's place, and I keep telling her soon without giving a specific date. Murphy hasn't asked about it once. My relationship with both kids has changed since all of this started. Leanna is angry with me most of the time. She blames me for the divorce, even though she doesn't know the full story. She makes comments about how things were better before, how I ruined everything. I try not to react to it, but it's hard. Murphy is different. He's quieter than he used to be. He does his homework, helps around the house, cooks a couple times a week, but he doesn't talk to me the way he used to. Before all this happened, he'd tell me about videos he watched or things he learned at school. Now he just gives short answers when I ask him questions. I thought removing Helen from the house would fix things for him, but I'm not sure it has. Maybe the damage was already done by the time I did something about it. Helen sent me a text last week asking if we could talk in person, just the two of us. I haven't responded yet. Part of me doesn't see the point in talking to her. Another part wonders if I owe her at least a conversation after 14 years of marriage. I don't know what she'd even have to say that would change anything. Update 3: The divorce was finalized last month. Helen didn't fight the final terms. I kept the house, primary custody of both kids, and most of our savings since I'd been the only one working for the past 8 years. She got her car and some money to help her get started living on her own again. She moved into an apartment about 20 minutes away. It's a small place, 1 bedroom, but she said she's working on getting a job and finding somewhere bigger where the kids could have their own rooms for overnight visits. The supervised visits continued for another 6 weeks. My mother said Helen was doing better each time, showing up on time, staying sober, bringing activities for the kids to do together. Leanna was always excited to go. Murphy went without complaining but never said much about it afterward. Then Helen's lawyer filed paperwork to end the supervision requirement. There was a hearing where Helen had to prove she was stable. She brought documentation of her counseling sessions, proof of steady employment at a bakery, and passed a drug test. The judge agreed to unsupervised visits starting with day visits only, no overnights yet. The first unsupervised visit was 5 weeks ago. Helen picked up both kids on a Saturday morning and took them to a park, then out for lunch. Leanna came home talking nonstop about everything they'd done. Murphy said it was fine when I asked him about it. Helen has been taking them every other Saturday since then. 3 weeks ago, she asked if she could take them to her apartment for the visit. I agreed. Leanna was excited to see where her mother was living. Murphy just shrugged when I told him about the plan. When they got back that evening, Leanna ran upstairs immediately. Murphy stayed in the kitchen while I was cleaning up from dinner. He stood there for a minute before asking me if I thought things would ever go back to normal. I asked him what he meant by normal. He said he didn't know, just that everything felt wrong now. I didn't know how to respond to that. I told him that things wouldn't be exactly like they were before, but that didn't mean they couldn't be good in a different way. He nodded and went upstairs. Last week, Helen asked me if I'd thought about what she'd texted me months ago about talking in person. I'd ignored it the first time, but she brought it up again. I finally agreed to meet her for coffee one afternoon while the kids were at school. She looked healthier than the last time I'd seen her up close. She'd gained back some weight, her skin wasn't as pale, and she seemed more alert. We sat down and she immediately started apologizing again. She said she'd been working through a lot in counseling, that she understood now why she'd reacted the way she had about Murphy's cooking. She explained that when I'd praised Murphy so much, it brought up all these feelings about her own mother and grandmother. Apparently, her grandmother had been incredibly critical of her mother's cooking, always comparing it to her own and finding it lacking. Helen had grown up watching her mother try and fail to get approval from her grandmother. When Helen became a good cook herself, it was the first time her grandmother had given her genuine praise. She said that when I complimented Murphy's food so enthusiastically, she felt like I was doing to her what her grandmother had done to her mother. She felt like I was replacing her with a better version, just like her grandmother had always implied her mother was a disappointment. I listened to all of this without saying much. When she finished, I told her I understood the explanation, but it didn't excuse what she'd done to Murphy. She agreed. She said she knew she'd hurt him badly and that she was trying to make up for it, but she also knew it might be too late for that. She asked me if there was any possibility we could try again. Not right away, but eventually, once she'd proven she was better. I told her no. She started crying then. She said she'd expected that answer but had hoped I'd changed my mind. I told her I hadn't. Too much had happened, and I couldn't trust her anymore, especially around Murphy. She wiped her eyes and said she understood. Before I left, she asked me if Murphy hated her. I told her I didn't think he hated her, but that he definitely didn't trust her. She nodded and thanked me for meeting with her. Helen's lawyer filed for overnight visits 2 weeks ago. The hearing is scheduled for next month. Leanna is excited about potentially staying over at her mother's apartment. Murphy said he'd rather stay home, but he'll go if he has to because he doesn't want Leanna to be there alone. Murphy's been cooking more often now. 3 or 4 times a week, he'll make dinner for all of us. His food has gotten even better. Last week he made this Portuguese dish, something with cod and potatoes. I asked him where he'd learned it, and he said he'd found the recipe online. I didn't ask anything else about it. Leanna is still angry with me most days. She makes it clear she thinks I should have forgiven Helen, that families are supposed to stay together no matter what. She's only 10, so I try not to take it personally, but it's hard to live with someone who resents you constantly. My parents still see Helen sometimes when she picks up the kids from their house for visits. My mother told me last week that Helen asks about me every time, wanting to know if I'm seeing anyone or if I seem happy. I told my mother not to answer those questions. I haven't dated anyone since the separation started. A woman at work asked me out for drinks a month ago, and I said no. I'm not interested in trying to start something new when my life is still this messy. Maybe that'll change eventually, but right now I'm just focused on getting through each day. Things aren't good, but they're stable. Murphy is cooking again. Leanna is adjusting to the new arrangement. Helen is sober and employed. The divorce is done. I'm living in the same house, sleeping in what used to be the guest room because I haven't moved back into the master bedroom. This isn't the ending I thought I'd have when I first posted asking for advice about counseling. But it's the ending I've got, and I'm dealing with it the only way I know how. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. My sister destroyed my college graduation party with humiliating slideshow of my worst moments, so I kicked her out in front of everyone. Now my entire family is attacking me and blaming my girlfriend for turning me against them. But wait until you hear what my sister did next. I graduated from college last month after 6 years of part-time study while working full-time to support myself. This wasn't just any degree completion. I had dropped out when I was 19 because my dad lost his job and I needed to help with family finances. Going back to school at 25 while working 40 hours a week at a warehouse was the hardest thing I've ever done. My girlfriend Teresa, 24F, and I have been together for 3 years. She watched me struggle through every late-night studying session, every missed weekend because I had assignments due, and every time I wanted to quit because the workload felt impossible. She brought me coffee during my all-nighters, helped me practice presentations, and never complained when our dates got canceled because I had exams. When I finally walked across that stage to get my diploma, she cried harder than I did. We planned a small graduation party at our apartment for close friends and family. Nothing fancy, just some food, drinks, and a chance to celebrate finally finishing something I started 7 years ago. Teresa spent the whole previous day cooking and decorating. She made a photo wall with pictures from my college years, including some pretty embarrassing ones of me falling asleep at my desk and stress eating during finals week. My sister Barbara, 28F, has always had what my family calls a quirky sense of humor. Since we were kids, she's been the type to pull pranks that made everyone else uncomfortable while she laughed. In middle school, she once brought photos of me from when I had terrible acne to show my friends during lunch. In high school, she told my girlfriend at the time about how I used to wet the bed until I was 8, right in front of a group of people at a party. When I got upset about these things, my parents always said I was being too sensitive and that Barbara was just trying to include me in the fun. The pattern continued into adulthood. 2 years ago at my cousin's wedding, she brought up embarrassing stories about me during her maid of honor speech, including details about a time I got food poisoning and had an accident. Last year at Christmas dinner, she showed everyone old videos of me having a meltdown when I was 12 because my parents wouldn't buy me a video game. Every time I confronted her, she said I needed to learn to take a joke. My parents Quinn, 52M, and Qley, 49F, always defended her. They said Barbara didn't mean any harm and that siblings are supposed to tease each other. When I told them her jokes hurt my feelings, they said I was being dramatic and that family should be able to laugh together. My mom often said that Barbara's humor was just her way of showing love. The graduation party started well. About 20 people came, some coworkers, college friends, Teresa's family, and my family. Everyone was having a good time, eating, talking, and congratulating me on finally finishing my degree. My parents seemed proud, and my dad even gave a short speech about how he admired my determination to go back to school. Around an hour into the party, Barbara announced she had prepared a special surprise for me. She connected her laptop to our TV and said she wanted to show everyone some photos to celebrate my achievement. I assumed it would be nice pictures from throughout the years, maybe some childhood photos mixed with recent ones. The slideshow started with a photo of me from freshman year of college the first time around, when I was 18 and had really bad fashion sense. Barbara added commentary about how I looked like I was trying to be a punk rocker but ended up looking like I raided a thrift store blindfolded. Everyone laughed a little, and I figured it was harmless. Then the photos got worse. She had screenshots of my old social media posts from when I was going through a difficult time after dropping out of college. There were photos of me looking exhausted and defeated, pictures Teresa had taken of me during some of my lowest moments when I was questioning whether I'd ever be successful. One photo showed me crying at my desk after failing a particularly difficult exam during my second attempt at college. Barbara narrated each photo with jokes about how I was always dramatic and emotional. She pointed out how I looked like I was about to give up on life in most of the pictures. She made comments about my weight gain during stressful periods, calling attention to my face looking puffy and tired. She said I had always been the family member who couldn't handle pressure. The worst part was when she showed a photo Teresa had taken of me last year during finals week. I was sitting on our couch surrounded by textbooks and empty energy drink cans, looking completely overwhelmed. Barbara announced to everyone that this was what I looked like when I was pretending to be a serious student, and that Teresa probably had to babysit me through most of my classes. I looked around the room and saw that nobody was laughing anymore. Teresa had gone completely pale and stepped closer to me. My coworkers looked uncomfortable and were staring at their drinks. Even my college friends seemed shocked by what they were seeing. Barbara kept going, oblivious to the room's reaction. She showed more photos and made jokes about how long it took me to graduate compared to everyone else, suggesting that I was probably too slow to understand the material. She said Teresa must have done most of my homework for me, which wasn't true but still humiliated both of us in front of everyone. I stood up and walked over to where Barbara was standing by the TV. I told her the slideshow was over and asked her to turn it off. She laughed and said she still had more photos to show. She said everyone was enjoying the trip down memory lane and that I shouldn't be so uptight about a little fun. I reached over and closed her laptop myself. I told her she needed to leave my apartment immediately. Barbara acted confused and said she was just trying to celebrate with me. She claimed everyone thought her presentation was funny and entertaining. I looked around the room again and saw people avoiding eye contact and looking extremely uncomfortable. Barbara argued that I was overreacting and ruining my own party. She said I had always been too sensitive and that she was just trying to add some humor to the evening. She accused me of being ungrateful since she had spent time putting together the slideshow as a gift for me. I repeated that she needed to leave. When she refused and tried to reopen her laptop, I unplugged it from the TV and handed it back to her. I told her that her idea of humor was cruel and that I was tired of being the target of her jokes. She called me dramatic and said I was embarrassing her in front of everyone. My parents immediately sided with Barbara. My dad said I was being rude to my sister who had tried to do something nice for me. My mom said Barbara's presentation was just sibling teasing and that I should appreciate the effort she put into making it. They both said I was causing unnecessary drama at my own party. I told them that if they couldn't see why Barbara's slideshow was inappropriate, they were welcome to leave with her. My mom accused me of choosing sides and creating family conflict over nothing. My dad said I was letting my college education go to my head and forgetting how to treat family members. Barbara finally left, but not before announcing to the room that I had always been the problem child in the family and couldn't take constructive criticism. My parents followed her out, with my mom saying she was disappointed in how I had handled the situation. The party continued after they left, but the mood was completely different. Teresa spent the rest of the evening trying to make sure our remaining guests were comfortable, but I could tell she was shaken by what had happened. Several people came up to me privately and said they thought Barbara's slideshow was inappropriate and that I had done the right thing by stopping it. My phone started buzzing with texts from my parents and Barbara within an hour of them leaving. My mom sent several messages saying I had humiliated my sister and caused unnecessary family drama. She said Barbara was just trying to be funny and that I should apologize for embarrassing her. My dad texted that I needed to fix things with Barbara because family should stick together no matter what. Barbara sent me a long message saying I had ruined her surprise and made her look bad in front of everyone. She said I was being overly sensitive like always and that normal siblings should be able to joke with each other. She claimed she had spent hours making the slideshow as a gift and that I had thrown her effort back in her face. The texts continued for several days. My parents kept saying I should reach out to Barbara and apologize for my reaction. They said she was hurt by how I had treated her and that I should be the bigger person since I was the one who caused the scene. My mom said Barbara was just trying to include some lighthearted memories in my celebration. Teresa hasn't said much about what happened, but I noticed she deleted several photos from her phone after the party. When I asked her about it, she said she didn't want to keep pictures that might be used to hurt me later. She also started being more careful about what she posted on social media, which made me realize how much Barbara's slideshow had affected her too. I've been getting pressure from extended family members as well. My aunt called to say that Barbara was upset and that I should consider how my reaction affected her. My cousin sent a message saying that families should be able to laugh together and that I might have overreacted to what was meant as harmless fun. The whole situation has made me question whether I handled things correctly. Maybe I did overreact by kicking Barbara out of my party. Maybe I should have just let her finish the slideshow and moved on. But every time I think about Teresa's face when she saw those photos being used to mock me, I get angry all over again. I worked too hard to get this degree to let anyone, even family, turn my graduation celebration into a joke at my expense. But now I'm wondering if standing up for myself was worth fracturing relationships with my parents and sister. Did I go too far by kicking her out, or was I right to protect myself and Teresa from Barbara's idea of humor? Update 1. It's been 3 weeks since I posted about my graduation party disaster. I wanted to thank everyone who commented and messaged me with support. Reading your responses helped me realize I wasn't overreacting to what Barbara did. After the party, I decided to take a break from talking to my family. I needed time to process what happened without getting bombarded with messages telling me I was wrong. I blocked Barbara on social media and stopped responding to my parents' texts asking me to apologize to her. Teresa and I went away for a long weekend to visit her college roommate in another city. It was nice to get away from the drama and spend time with people who weren't involved in the family situation. Teresa's friend couldn't believe what Barbara had done when we told her the story. She said she would have kicked Barbara out too, and probably much sooner than I did. When we got back home on Sunday evening, my parents were sitting in their car outside our apartment building. They had been waiting for over an hour, according to our neighbor who mentioned seeing them when we walked in. I wasn't expecting them and honestly didn't want to deal with another conversation about Barbara. They followed us upstairs and said they needed to talk about what happened at the party. My dad said they had given me enough time to cool off and that it was time to resolve the family conflict. My mom said Barbara had been upset for weeks and that I needed to understand how much I had hurt her feelings. We sat down in our living room, and immediately my parents started defending Barbara again. My dad said she had spent a lot of time putting together the slideshow and that her intentions were good. He said siblings are supposed to tease each other and that I was taking her jokes too seriously. My mom added that Barbara grew up in the same house as me, so she knew what kind of humor I could handle. I tried to explain that showing photos of me at my lowest points to a room full of people wasn't teasing, it was cruel. I told them that some of those photos were from really difficult times in my life, and using them to get laughs felt like a betrayal. My mom interrupted me and said I was being dramatic about normal family dynamics. Then my dad said something that really bothered me. He told me that Teresa was probably influencing my reaction and that I didn't used to be so sensitive about family jokes. He suggested that Teresa might be causing problems between me and my family because she didn't understand our sense of humor. My mom nodded and said that girlfriends sometimes try to create distance between their boyfriends and their families. Teresa had been quietly listening up until that point, but when they started blaming her, she spoke up. She said she had never tried to influence my relationship with my family and that she had always encouraged me to maintain close ties with them. She pointed out that she had spent the day before the party cooking and preparing for everyone, including Barbara and my parents. My mom responded by saying that Teresa was too sensitive as well, and that she should understand that Barbara's slideshow was meant to be loving sibling humor. She said Teresa needed to develop thicker skin if she was going to be part of our family. My dad added that Teresa should appreciate Barbara's effort instead of taking offense at harmless jokes. That's when I lost my patience completely. I told my parents that their version of loving humor had been hurting me for years, and I was done pretending it was acceptable. I said Barbara's jokes weren't funny to anyone except her, and that I didn't owe her an apology for refusing to be humiliated at my own graduation party. My dad got defensive and said I was being disrespectful to my parents and sister. He brought up how they had supported me financially when I was younger and that I should show more loyalty to my family. My mom said I was throwing away important relationships over a misunderstanding. I told them that if they couldn't see why Barbara's behavior was wrong, then we didn't have anything else to discuss. I said I wasn't going to apologize for protecting myself and Teresa from cruel jokes disguised as family humor. My mom started crying and said I was breaking up the family over nothing. Before they left, my dad said I was making a huge mistake by choosing Teresa's feelings over my family's relationships. He said girlfriends come and go, but family is permanent. My mom added that Barbara was genuinely hurt by my reaction and that I should consider reaching out to her before it was too late to repair their relationship. After they left, Teresa and I barely spoke for the rest of the evening. I could tell she was shaken by having my parents blame her for the family conflict. She kept apologizing for causing problems, even though none of this was her fault. I assured her that my parents were wrong to blame her, but I could see the situation was affecting her more than she wanted to admit. The next day, I got a call from my Aunt Karen, 45F, my mom's sister. She said my parents had told her about our conversation and that she wanted to offer some perspective. I thought maybe she would be more neutral since she wasn't as close to the day-to-day family dynamics. Instead, Karen said she thought I was making a mistake by cutting off communication with Barbara. She said Barbara had called her crying about how I had embarrassed her at the party and refused to accept her apology. I asked what apology she was referring to, since Barbara had never actually apologized for the slideshow. Karen seemed surprised and said Barbara had told her she tried to apologize multiple times but that I wouldn't listen. She said Barbara felt terrible about upsetting me and wanted to make things right. This was completely different from the messages Barbara had actually sent me, where she defended her slideshow and said I was being too sensitive. I realized Barbara had been telling different versions of the story to different family members. To our parents, she was the victim of my overreaction. To our aunt, she was the remorseful sister trying to apologize to her stubborn brother. I started wondering what other stories she might be telling to make herself look better. Karen said the whole family was worried about me and that everyone thought I was handling the situation poorly. She mentioned that Barbara was considering skipping our cousin's upcoming wedding because she was afraid I would cause another scene if she attended. This made me angry because I had never threatened to cause problems at anyone else's events. After talking to Karen, I realized my family had completely rewritten the narrative of what happened at my graduation party. In their version, Barbara made an innocent mistake with her slideshow, I overreacted and embarrassed her, and now I was being stubborn by refusing to apologize and move on. My relationship with Teresa was being portrayed as the root cause of my changed attitude toward family dynamics. Teresa suggested we should probably expect more surprise visits and phone calls from family members trying to convince me to reconcile with Barbara. She was right. Over the next few days, I got calls from 2 cousins and my uncle, all saying similar things about family loyalty and forgiveness. The most frustrating part is that none of them acknowledged what Barbara actually did wrong. They all focused on my reaction and how I should handle things differently. Nobody seemed to think Barbara should face any consequences for humiliating me at my own graduation celebration. I've decided to maintain my distance from my family until they can acknowledge that Barbara's behavior was inappropriate. I'm not going to apologize for setting boundaries or for protecting Teresa from their blame. But I'm starting to realize this conflict might last much longer than I originally expected. Update 2. 2 months have passed since my last update. The family situation has gotten more complicated, and I've learned some things about Barbara that I probably should have figured out years ago. About a month ago, my cousin Jake, 26M, reached out to me. Jake and I were close growing up, and he was one of the people at my graduation party who looked uncomfortable during Barbara's slideshow. He said he wanted to talk about what happened, but not to pressure me into reconciling with Barbara. Jake told me something interesting. He said Barbara had been complaining to family members that I was being unreasonable, but she had also been bragging to some of her friends about how funny her slideshow was. According to Jake, Barbara showed the same slideshow to her coworkers and was laughing about how upset I got. She apparently said I couldn't take a joke and that the whole family was walking on eggshells around me now. This was completely different from the remorseful sister story she had been telling my aunt and parents. Jake said he thought I should know that Barbara wasn't actually sorry about what she did, she was just frustrated that there were consequences for her actions. Jake also mentioned that this wasn't the first time Barbara had done something like this. He reminded me about our cousin Sarah's, 24F, baby shower 2 years ago, when Barbara made a presentation about Sarah's dating history before she met her husband. Sarah had asked Jake privately if he thought the presentation was appropriate, but she didn't want to cause family drama by confronting Barbara directly. I started thinking about other times Barbara had embarrassed family members with her jokes, and I realized there was a pattern I had missed. She always targeted people during their important moments, graduations, weddings, baby showers, birthday parties. She seemed to enjoy taking attention away from other people's celebrations and making herself the center of attention with her humor. A few days after talking to Jake, I got a text from an unknown number. It turned out to be Barbara, messaging me from a different phone since I had blocked her main number. She said she wanted to meet in person to clear the air between us. She suggested we meet at a coffee shop near my apartment to talk about what happened at the graduation party. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. Teresa thought it was a bad idea, but I wanted to see if Barbara would actually apologize when she couldn't perform for an audience of family members who always took her side. Barbara showed up 15 minutes late to our meeting. She seemed casual and relaxed, not like someone who was genuinely sorry about causing problems. She ordered her coffee and started talking about her job and other random topics, avoiding the reason we were supposed to be meeting. Finally, I brought up the graduation party and asked if she understood why I was upset about her slideshow. Barbara sighed and said she guessed she could see how some people might have taken it the wrong way. She said she had been trying to make my party more fun and memorable, and she was sorry if I didn't appreciate the effort she put into creating the presentation. That wasn't really an apology, it was more like she was sorry I had the wrong reaction to her slideshow. I asked her directly if she thought showing photos of me crying and struggling was appropriate for a graduation celebration. Barbara said those photos showed my journey and how far I had come, so she thought they were actually inspiring. I pointed out that she had made jokes about my appearance and suggested that Teresa had to babysit me through college. Barbara laughed and said those were obviously exaggerations for comedic effect, and that anyone with a sense of humor would understand she wasn't being serious. When I asked why she thought it was okay to embarrass me in front of my friends and coworkers, Barbara got defensive. She said I had always been too sensitive about family teasing, and that most people would be grateful to have a sister who cared enough to put together a special presentation for their party. Then Barbara said something that really bothered me. She told me that Teresa was probably the one who convinced me to be upset about the slideshow, because Teresa didn't understand our family's sense of humor. She said she had noticed Teresa acting cold toward her at family gatherings, and that Teresa was probably jealous of the close relationship Barbara and I used to have. This was completely untrue. Teresa had always been polite to Barbara and had never said anything negative about her until after the graduation party. If anything, Teresa had encouraged me to maintain relationships with my family members even when their behavior bothered me. I told Barbara that Teresa wasn't the problem, and that I was capable of being upset about something without outside influence. Barbara rolled her eyes and said I had definitely changed since I started dating Teresa, and not in a good way. She said the old version of me would have laughed along with her jokes instead of making everything into a dramatic confrontation. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but Barbara never took actual responsibility for what she had done. Every time I explained why her slideshow was hurtful, she either defended her actions or blamed me for being too sensitive. She said she missed the way our relationship used to be before I became so serious about everything. Before we left the coffee shop, Barbara said she was willing to forgive me for embarrassing her at the graduation party if I was ready to move past our disagreement. She said family should be able to work through conflicts without holding grudges. She offered to pretend the whole thing never happened if I would start responding to her messages and attend family gatherings again. I realized Barbara genuinely believed she was the injured party in this situation. She thought I owed her an apology for my reaction to her slideshow, and that she was being generous by offering to forgive me. She had no understanding of why her behavior was wrong, and she wasn't interested in changing her approach to family relationships. I told Barbara I wouldn't be apologizing to her, and that I needed her to acknowledge that her slideshow was inappropriate before we could have any kind of relationship. She said I was being stubborn and unreasonable, and that I was choosing to destroy our family relationships over a harmless joke. After Barbara left, I felt more convinced that I had made the right decision by distancing myself from her. The meeting confirmed that she wasn't actually sorry about what she had done, she was just frustrated that I wasn't playing along with her version of family dynamics anymore. When I got home, I told Teresa about the conversation. She said she wasn't surprised that Barbara had tried to blame her for our family conflict. Teresa pointed out that Barbara seemed to have a pattern of avoiding responsibility by redirecting blame onto other people. A week later, my mom called to ask how my meeting with Barbara had gone. She seemed to think Barbara and I had resolved our differences, which made me realize Barbara had probably told her a different version of our conversation. When I explained that Barbara hadn't actually apologized and had instead blamed Teresa for our problems, my mom sighed and said I was being too demanding about what constituted a proper apology. My mom said Barbara had tried her best to make things right, and that I should accept her effort even if it wasn't perfect. She said family relationships require compromise and that I couldn't expect Barbara to grovel for forgiveness over a misunderstanding. I told my mom that showing embarrassing photos of someone at their graduation party wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a choice. I said Barbara had multiple opportunities to realize her slideshow was inappropriate, but she chose to continue anyway. My mom said I was overthinking the situation and making it more complicated than it needed to be. That conversation with my mom made me realize that my parents would never hold Barbara accountable for her behavior. They had spent so many years making excuses for her jokes that they couldn't recognize when she had genuinely crossed a line. In their minds, maintaining family harmony was more important than addressing hurtful behavior. I decided to stop hoping that my family would validate my feelings about what happened at the graduation party. They had made it clear that they prioritized Barbara's comfort over my boundaries, and that wasn't going to change regardless of what she did or said. Update 3, it's been 4 months since Barbara ruined my graduation party, and I'm writing this final update because the situation has reached a conclusion of sorts. I won't be reconciling with my family, and I'm at peace with that decision. 3 weeks after my coffee shop meeting with Barbara, my cousin's wedding took place. I had been looking forward to this wedding for months. My cousin Mark, 27M, and I had always been close, and I was supposed to be one of his groomsmen. Teresa had already bought a dress, and we had arranged time off work to attend. 2 days before the wedding, Mark called me. He sounded uncomfortable and said he needed to talk to me about the wedding arrangements. Apparently, Barbara had been telling family members that she was afraid I might cause a scene at the wedding if she attended. She said she was still traumatized from how I had treated her at my graduation party. Mark said Barbara had convinced my parents and some other relatives that having both of us at the wedding was a recipe for disaster. She suggested that maybe I should consider skipping the wedding to avoid creating drama on Mark's special day. When Mark's parents heard about the potential for family conflict, they asked Mark to handle the situation. Mark said he didn't want to choose sides, but he was worried about having family drama at his wedding. He asked if I would be willing to skip the ceremony to keep the peace. He promised we could celebrate together privately after his honeymoon, and he said he hoped I would understand that he was trying to protect his wedding day. I was stunned. Barbara had managed to get me uninvited from my own cousin's wedding by claiming she was afraid of my behavior. She had turned herself into the victim so effectively that Mark's family was more worried about my potential reaction than her history of inappropriate behavior at family events. I told Mark I understood his position, but I was disappointed that Barbara's manipulation had been successful. I said I wouldn't cause problems at his wedding, but I also wouldn't skip it just because Barbara was uncomfortable facing the consequences of her actions. Mark seemed relieved that I wasn't angry with him, but he said he still thought it would be better if I didn't attend. Teresa was furious when I told her about the conversation. She said Barbara had orchestrated the whole situation to isolate me from family events and make me look like the problem family member. She pointed out that Barbara had never actually been afraid of me, she just didn't want to be around someone who wouldn't tolerate her jokes anymore. We decided not to attend the wedding. I didn't want to put Mark in an uncomfortable position, and I was tired of having to defend my boundaries to people who should have supported me. Teresa said she was proud of me for refusing to play Barbara's games, even though it meant missing an important family event. The wedding happened without us. According to Jake, who texted me afterward, Barbara gave a speech about family loyalty and forgiveness. She apparently made subtle references to family members who had abandoned their relationships over minor disagreements. Jake said it was clear she was talking about me, and that several relatives looked uncomfortable during her speech. A few days after the wedding, my dad called me. He said Barbara had been asking family members to reach out to me because she was worried about our relationship. He said she genuinely wanted to repair things between us, and that she was willing to meet me halfway if I would consider giving her another chance. I asked my dad what giving Barbara another chance would look like practically. He said I should start by responding to her messages and attending family gatherings again. He said once we were spending time together regularly, we could work on rebuilding our sibling relationship gradually. I pointed out that Barbara had never actually apologized for her slideshow or acknowledged that her behavior was inappropriate. My dad said apologies weren't always necessary between family members, and that showing up and participating in family activities was more important than focusing on past conflicts. That conversation made me realize my family would never require Barbara to take responsibility for her behavior. They expected me to tolerate her jokes and manipulation indefinitely because family relationships were supposed to be unconditional. In their minds, my boundaries were less important than maintaining their comfortable family dynamics. I made the decision to go no contact with my parents and Barbara. I sent them each a brief message explaining that I wouldn't be participating in family relationships that required me to accept disrespectful treatment. I said I was open to rebuilding our relationships in the future if they were willing to acknowledge that Barbara's behavior had been inappropriate and commit to respecting my boundaries. My mom responded with a long message about how disappointed she was in my decision. She said I was throwing away important relationships over pride and stubbornness. She accused Teresa of turning me against my family and said she hoped I would realize my mistake before it was too late to repair the damage I was causing. My dad sent a shorter message saying he didn't understand why I was choosing to hurt people who loved me. He said families should be able to work through conflicts without cutting each other off, and that I was setting a bad precedent for how disagreements should be handled. Barbara sent several messages from different phone numbers after I blocked her main contact. She alternated between blaming me for destroying our family relationships and begging me to reconsider my decision. In one message, she said she would be willing to apologize for her slideshow if that's what it would take to fix our relationship. I didn't respond to any of their messages. The offer of an apology felt like another manipulation tactic rather than genuine remorse, especially since it came only after I had cut off contact entirely. It's been 2 months since I went no contact with my immediate family. Some extended family members have reached out to express disappointment in my decision, but others have been supportive. My Uncle Tom, 48M, my dad's brother, said he thought I was handling a difficult situation with maturity and that he respected my decision to prioritize my mental health. Teresa and I are doing well. We ended up having our own private celebration for my graduation, just the two of us and a few close friends. It felt more meaningful than the original party because everyone there actually wanted to celebrate my accomplishment rather than use it as an entertainment opportunity. We've also become closer to Teresa's family, who have been welcoming and supportive throughout this whole situation. Her parents said they couldn't imagine treating their children the way mine treated me, and they've made it clear that I'm always welcome at their family gatherings. I don't regret my decision to cut contact with my family. The past few months have been peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I'm not constantly worried about what inappropriate joke Barbara might make next, or how my parents might dismiss my feelings if I complained about her behavior. Some people have asked if I miss my family or if I plan to reconcile with them eventually. I miss the idea of having a supportive family, but I don't miss the actual relationships I had with them. Those relationships required me to accept disrespectful treatment and pretend it was normal, which wasn't sustainable for my mental health or my relationship with Teresa. I'm open to reconnecting with my family in the future if they're willing to acknowledge what went wrong and commit to treating me with respect. But I'm not holding my breath waiting for that to happen. Based on their responses to my decision to go no contact, they still believe I'm the one who needs to change my expectations rather than them needing to change their behavior. For now, I'm focusing on building a life with people who actually care about my well-being. Teresa and I are planning to get engaged next year, and we're both excited about creating our own family traditions that don't involve tolerating cruel behavior in the name of family loyalty. Going no contact with toxic family members isn't easy, but sometimes it's the healthiest option available. I wish things had worked out differently, but I'm not willing to sacrifice my self-respect to maintain relationships with people who don't respect my boundaries.